welcome everybody. I'm delighted to introduce Jemila MacEwan, but who needs very little introduction to many people here. But she's going to talk to us about 2 art projects that she's been involved with, and I'm not going to say anything more about it. Over to you, Jemila.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me and for being willing to have me speak about a few projects. I am going to give myself an introduction. I am daughter of Simon. Simon? Oh my goodness. I'm not Simon's daughter, Simon's sister. Rashid and Aisha. I rarely give talks in front of my parents, so but I am their youngest daughter. I'm part of the first generation of children to be born to the let's just call you the first ones. And while we did emigrate to Australia when I was 3, I do believe that a lot of the way that I have come to understand and relate to the world is very much rooted in this place. So it's always really a curious joy to return here and have so many people come up to me and say, "Oh, do you remember me? You were this big." So that's always really lovely, and some of you I've seen a few times. I've only been able to return twice, but it's always really welcoming and wonderful to be here. And I do think about the roots of how I think about the world as being very much about the importance of interconnected support of place, of land, very much being in the ethos of this place, and it runs through all my siblings too. So I also think about the work that I do as an artist kind of being a continuation of the curious exploration that began in this place. When I think about the founding of this place and my parents' involvement, and many of you that were there in those early days, I think about how young you all were, and how wanting you were for and a real belief that there is this divine knowledge in the world and that it is available to us, and that we can find our own pathway to it. And for me, my pathway to that has really been through art, and I think that has come very much through my parents, rather than kind of prescribing a spiritual cosmology or way. They always very much encouraged their children to find our own way, to find our own curious paths, and they were always more interested in that. Because this is Gardening Week, I'm going to talk about 2 projects of mine that relate to gardening. I also think about these 2 projects as kind of sibling works. The one on the right is called Human Meteorite, and it's a work that I did, a performance and earthwork that I did in 2017, for which I dug every day for 30 days a meteor crater, or rather a human meteor crater, because I became the Human Meteorite for this work. I dug every day from sunrise to sunset, or to kind of whatever the limits of the day were. On the left is a very recent work that I did in April this year in Washington Square Park in New York. The one on the right, I should say, this was in Northern California in a meadow, very remote. It was once a redwood forest, now a site that has been mostly cleared for pasture land. On the left, Washington Square Park, the middle of Manhattan. So I am really interested in very much contending with place in all kinds of dimensions, but often in disturbed ecosystems. For this one, for seed meditation, it was shorter in duration. I sat in Washington Square Park from sunrise to sunset for 10 days in meditation, and throughout that time I also had people join me throughout it, sitting, talking, I was mostly a noble silence, but if there was need for conversation, I would engage people. But first up, I'm going to talk about this work, Human Meteorite. So the way that this came about, and I didn't know it would look like this. This is in the final moments of day 30, but I didn't know it would look like this. And the impetus for this work came from a sensation of overwhelming species shame. This was in 2017, and we just had one of many now devastating IPCC reports that were informing us of the hundreds of species that were going extinct by our hands, the, actually projected climate situation is actually worse now than was projected at this time. But I felt like, how can we even begin to approach these problems if we can't even process the emotional friction that it brings up and the massive amounts of shame that it brings up, knowing that we are perpetrators of this mass extinction. And so there was this sort of impulse to turn away. And maybe, as many of you might sort of be aware, shame is really a hindrance to creative thought. And I was like, we can never really solve these problems if we're kind of trapped in a state of shame, so how do we process this shame? And interestingly, rather than kind of try to find an alternative to that, I leaned into it and I was like, okay, what does it mean to actually be in this state of being the meteorite, of being the first sentient driver of extinction? So a meteorite, non-sentient driver of extinction, fairly instantaneous event with a long fallout. And so this was one of many projects in which I take an ecomorphic approach to understanding my humanity, where I kind of hybridize or ecomorph into another entity. So in this case, as a meteorite, and I began digging. The first day, I'm gonna skip. This was day one, which is it's a 6 foot wide, 1.5 foot deep hole, and I was really, despite being a soil scientist and avid gardener's daughter, I am the youngest of 5. So most of the digging work in our family was always given to the older siblings, and I was really more of a seed sorter. So I didn't actually even know how to wield a shovel. I didn't even know how to dig. And so I went to a friend of mine who runs a community garden, and I asked him for a tutorial. And he gave me an amazing tutorial, and I spent a month with a Pilates instructor working out how to kind of hold. And if anyone suffers from back problems when they're digging, please come to me. I'll so happily give you a digging tutorial. And it's never too old to learn. You might have been doing it wrong all these years, who knows? But my Pilates instructor gave me the comforting farewell when I told him, oh yeah, I leave in 3 days, of, wow, you are not remotely ready. But that was good in a way, because I learnt that I needed to be really very gentle in how I approached. And so I'm going to show you, this is me kind of digging on, this must be about day 6 or something. And you can see I'm going slow. I realize you just can take your time. And what I found slowed me down even more than just, the physical strain of digging, is that digging has this really uncanny effect on you somatically, viscerally, that it just brings up things that have been buried inside you. And so as I would become physically stronger, I would also become physically weaker. As I would become emotionally stronger, I would also become emotionally more overwhelmed. And I would find in these moments something would come up and it would just wash over me, and I could no longer pick up my tool, and I would just have to stop like this. And I just would sit with it and let it move through me, and then, you know, lo and behold, it does move through you, and then you can get up again and you can keep moving. I did dig in all kinds of conditions. Rain, which you're all familiar with because we're in Scotland, and there was a lot yesterday. Yeah, I mean, a lot of you know digging in rain produces its own limitations. You know, you have to be really, it compacts the soil, it becomes a little bit dangerous, things are slippery, you lose grip on your feet. But I was very determined to dig every day. So on the rain days, I would just have to kind of work as cautiously and carefully as possible, even though I was, you know, kind of grimly determined to dig anyway. And then these kind of amazing things would happen that I didn't expect. And I enter all these projects really just ready to receive whatever unfolds within them. And after about 3 days of rain, I hit this beautiful gold sediment, and you can see on a day that is very grey, it makes the browns richer, and it made that golden centre so bright. And this process of spiralling round and going down, this was where I really realised that this process of digging in this circular motion, and how it really was the literal process of dilating what you can see and what you can know. That became such a teacher for me in terms of taking time. And then as I was doing this piece, I was also giving these live broadcasts every morning so that I could share with people the intimate aspects of what was happening as I was digging the field. And so also on that same rainy day, I discovered the screen is not quite capturing it, but this orange is just terracotta vivid. And I think after talking to Dad, we determined that it could even be that was the sediment of what had once been the redwood, that in that mineralized. So it was really this beautiful thing that was also really the grave of this huge ecosystem that had once lived there. And then, you know, moments like in these areas where I've compacted it because I've been digging on wet soil, these puddles have formed and little creatures fall in and drown. And so perpetrating extinction while I'm working. And then other just kind of beautiful, sublime moments, like the way that the soil drying on the shovel turns into the exact painting of the landscape that I'm in. And so these are all these poetic moments that you can only really discover by being and doing. You cannot predict them, but you become available to them. I also encountered many teachers. This was really the first work that I did that I discovered that there were many teachers on the way, and none more profound than these worms. I don't know if you've ever seen a worm tied in a little scrawny little knot like this, but the first 3 days I didn't see any insects, and I thought this was really quite a disturbing thing to encounter no insects in this meadow. There were spiders that were spinning mandalas every morning that I would see in the grass, but very few insects, and no worms and no insects in the ground. And then on day 3 I discovered these worms, but they were tied in these horrendous little knots, and I'd never seen it before, and I thought maybe the worms had become deranged, and it was just deeply disturbing. They were so weak, but when I would put them in my hand, they would start to unknot themselves like this. And then I got really fixated on picking up worms and holding them. But then I discovered if I piled them all together, they would kind of activate each other and they would unwind. And I got really super distracted with this worm infirmary. And then the birds would come and eat the worm. And I was like, oh, okay. So you start realizing how you're interacting with this ecosystem. So, but then by the end, actually, so this project, I did it in the fall, and so we're just out of a Californian summer and going into the fall or the autumn, as it is known here, and the rain, and as the soil got wetter, the worms just unknotted themselves. So I really didn't need to interfere in this process, but it was that curiosity, and it really felt like a mirroring of my own process, where I came in very much tangled in my head, feeling very physically weak, and by the end, I just would occasionally pick up a worm that was just, triumphantly fat, and just watch it dance for a while. So as I would go, I would kind of do these. I would record parts of it each day and watch it later. But I'm going to show you a little bit from my live broadcasts that I would do each day. I'm going to hold the microphone to the computer.
Good morning, everyone. It's day 10 of my project, Human Meteorite, in which I spend 29 days digging an impact crater in the earth. At a residency called This Will Take Time. And it really is taking time. And I have found that today, on day 10, which is 1/3 of the way into the project, that I have most certainly reached my physical limits. I could not really sleep very much last night because my arms and my back, like my shoulders, my arms and my shoulders were so sore. And I have to listen to my body. So today I am only going to do a token dig, which is very frustrating because I would like to keep going. But this is Human Meteorite, which means that I am subject to all of the limits of what it is to be a human being, as well as all the amazing things. So,
so it was very much about working up to limits, and sometimes those limits were emotional, and in this case they were physical. And what I noticed was actually the emotional, the spiritual, and the physical were almost like braided together. So when one would run short, the other two could not continue. But as each of them became stronger, I could kind of braid them together and keep going. I also just want to introduce this person because she's really a big part of my self-reflection in this work. Her name is Kathy. She has been riding horses through this land for 30 years. She rescues horses that are about to be turned into glue at her own expense, and rides horses through the land. And the first time she came to visit me, I didn't even notice her. I was concentrating, digging and suffering and, wondering how I was going to survive. And she did 3 laps of me and my crater before I even noticed she was there. And she had found my hat, had blown away on day 1, and this was day 3, and she had found my hat, and I was very grateful. But she was very suspicious of me. And she kind of left these parting words of, take care of the animals. And she told me about a few of the animals that were living in the tree line. I was like, thank you, da-da-da, very, very nice to meet you. She returned a couple of days later and asked me the question, why would you come here and make it look like a bomb had hit this place? Which, is not a very neutral statement. I could hear that she was very upset about what I was doing. And so rather than kind of, you know, confronting her and kind of making a stand for myself, instead I said, oh, I can understand that it's quite confronting for you to have me here. And it's clear you have a long connection with this land. Will you tell me your story? And she spent a long time telling me about her long relationship to animals. And then, and she has a deep affinity to animals. She's rescued all kinds of animals, and she knows this land so well. So to see it suddenly damaged, harmed in this way, was upsetting to her. And then I told her the nature of the project, what I was doing, and that what I understood, or what I was observing about what I was doing, was that I'm not bringing in anything new, but I am uncovering what has already been under her feet the whole time, and that I think that this soil itself is beautiful. And I brought her into that, and I told her about the worms, and I told her about the birds eating the worms. And then after that conversation, she became a very good friend to me. And she would kind of come past every few days and chat, but she really became such a strong advocate for the project and really connected to it, and grew a new sort of love of the place. But I think that it's always really important to, when I'm working in new places, to just acknowledge that first, that there is a grief that happens when you impact a site. And I mean, really, like, I couldn't fully argue against her anyway, because I was actually enacting a kind of a process of violence against the land. She was 100% correct in that. Yeah, this is just a fun sort of Vitruvian. I just tossed that in there. This, just because people are always kind of curious about the numbers with this, I calculated it was around 18,000 shovel loads and 1,200 wheelbarrow loads of soil. The whole diameter of this outer rim, which is where I would displace the soil from the inside, was 72 feet wide, and the inner crater ended up being 42 feet wide, 6 feet deep. This is another limitation that I would hit, which is sometimes the sky would present me with such beauty that even if I wanted to keep going, it was so clear to me that my job or my place in the world was really to stop and just be in awe, because it really felt like a gift. And so this whole time I was digging from full moon to full moon as well, so I had these celestial timekeepers of both the sun and the moon, and working in this way where I was working in spatially in the shape that I now think of as this is the shape of time. It goes deep and it goes round and it expands, and it's the shape of planets, and time is always in orbit. And I came to kind of realise that while I was doing this work, while I was in relationship to this rotation of the sun and the moon. And after this, I never really think of the ground I'm standing on as flat. I really do consider that I'm on a round planet. And this is right near the end. I managed to get someone to come and do this aerial footage, and this was the first time that I got to see that it was actually round, because everything had been measured with my own body. So it was all footsteps and shovel lengths until this point. And yeah, it was very moving to see, and the way that these shapes, resembles the iris of an eye. And then this, I'm going to show you a video that I find quite difficult to watch because it's the very last day, and it's very emotional. So, but I wanted to play for you. I rarely play this.
One full day of work ahead of me, and I was unsure how I felt originally, that I'd chosen to complete the work after the setting of the full moon. In a way, I was disappointed with myself that I hadn't decided to finish it so that the piece could be charged by the full moon. But then when I came around and I realised that it's the other way around, that the moon is the one that shows me what completeness looks like, and I follow the moon, I understood. Anyway, I'm very much going to miss doing this. Being able to speak honestly and candidly and in an unfiltered way every morning, I think in its way has also transformed me. And I hope that I'm able to hold on to the memory of what it is to be this truthful every day as I return and am no longer meteorite. I'll still be a little bit meteorite. Some transformations are irreversible. Anyway, I love every minute of this. I've never been moved so deeply through the process of creation, and I invite everyone to find in their own ways how to live like this. I know I will endeavour to, now that I know that it's possible. Okay, it's quite hard to say goodbye today because this will be my last. I may do a very end of day transmission, but for now, before I decide that, this is my final transmission as Human Meteorite, and it's been a pleasure to share this journey with all of you. And in fact, it has been so much more to share this journey with you. And that is how I feel. Love to you all. End transmission of Human Meteorite on the very last day of the performance, Human Meteorite.
And these were the final moments. And basically when it ended, I took my shoes off and climbed down into the center and lay there on my back, and there was this way that the earth cradled me in this way that I felt both held up and pulled down, and I've never felt gravity in that way, that I felt like I was part of the earth's gravity, and I just opened myself up to this huge blue sky, and yeah, I've never felt such overwhelming sense of love and divinity, really. It was almost painful, but I had learnt so much through this process that to unflinch from feelings even when they are overwhelming. But I felt every emotion within me in that moment, and I really felt cosmically loved. And yeah, there is this way that just the shape of this crater when you lie in it and you're 6 feet below the horizon and you have this circular horizon around you, it does something to all your molecules. They feel magnetically organized, and it made me actually understand why it was that people made the Neolithic sites that they did, that it was for these embodied feelings of cosmic connection. And 1 year later, I was sent this photo of the meadow in its beginning stages of repair. And John Mercer went and visited the site in even further along than this, and I think there had been a tree had started to grow out of the middle because the sediment had crawled down from the edges. But what was so incredible was seeing how this area that I had, trampled to death going back and forth with my wheelbarrow, the grass had come back fuller there than it was in the meadow around it. And and so there are these contradictions that you discover, these sort of feelings of inversion that actually, sometimes the process of something repairing, it comes back stronger than the places that were kind of left in a state of sort of midway being disturbed, I guess. And you can see the grass kind of creeping down. So then I finished that work, and I longed to do another durational piece. I made this, so this was 2017, and then a bunch of projects happened in the middle. I'm going to just sort of scoot through so you can sort of see the scope of them. I made a film called The Wake, which is about Europe's largest glacier melting and losing its wisdom teeth. So it's a kind of, I guess, surrealist environmental melodrama. This work, Dead Gods, in which I'm resurrecting, this is ongoing, resurrecting a prehistoric superfungi, the Prototaxides, which grew up to 30 foot tall by growing them from their contemporary living descendants. Accompanying that was a performance, mycelium meditation, that involved all kinds of really loud music and eating weird food and telling stories. This work, Breathing Rock, which is a rock that, an inflatable rock that is solar powered. So it inhales with the sunrise and exhales with the sunset. This work, Sun Seeds, which is a community project that I did in Taos, New Mexico, which is increasingly affected by heat and sun and wind as a result of climate change. So this was a way of building relationship to these elements in a way that was joyful with the children there. And then last year I was in Taranaki beginning a much, much bigger project involving filming 12 mountains around the world in time-lapse for 12 months that will eventually bring all of these 12 mountains around the world into council with one another. And I'm happy to talk about any of those projects with anyone later.